Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
So the statement came through this afternoon. We're delighted to announce the Ireland captain Johnny Sexton signed a contract extension up until the end of World Cup 2023, after which he'll sail off into the sunset after lifting the Webb Ellis Cup. I've added on a touch there to the statement. Johnny Sexton then speaking, Brian O'Driscoll, you're very welcome, to the press said he's delighted. He's going to attack the last 18 months, and that's his plan. So he's going out at the top, as he said himself.
Yeah, like, listen, there's no huge surprise, is there? But
no.
The only thing is, and I was thinking about this when I read it, and I, you know, I know from my own experience that as soon as you give the finality, you think you're doing one thing of kind of releasing the pressure valve of the questions, but actually it encourages something else that you can't control.
Did you have a drawn out goodbye?
I was like, there was a game or two that, know. So
yeah,
it was like, I look back on that now and I thought I was buying myself a bit of breathing space, but on the contrary, it actually ended up being that everything became a last. Last time in Franklin's Gardens in like December, Twickenham. Yeah. And then actually, as it transpired for me, I ended up, I don't know, I think I broke the world record, the cap record at the George Gregan in like my fourth last test. And so they all just were kind of landmark moments, and I was dying inside. Why? Because I just wanted it. By the end, it was that the whole one more year and the long goodbye, and I'd had too much of it. I was embarrassed by it by the end.
Okay, so it wasn't that it emotionally drained you?
No, not that. I like, a little bit of me was ready to retire because I knew I was ready to fall off a cliff performance wise. But that a lot coupled with the, oh, for God's sake, you know, are you not gone already? And I sensed that myself, and you think you're a good judge of the kind of situation you're living in. You'd like to think so, and I was dying a little bit inside. Yes,
I mean, I understood your logic at the time, because it ends the endless questions of, will this be your last year? Will this be your last year? And as you say, it transforms that into, my God, how are you feeling? It's the last time.
You're better off keeping them guessing, keep going, yeah, well, maybe we'll see, I'll decide closer to the time. You're just better off kicking it down the road. It's harder for Johnny because he's going to be 38. Yeah. And he's like, the only thing is, like, if Tom Brady and others are able to get to 40 and 41, like, you know, why cap it? Anyway, the only thing is, there's no place, it's different. There's no place for him in either Leinster or Ireland after the next World Cup. That's the only thing. Where, you know, in other sports, it works differently with franchises and so on, teams built around you and whatnot. They've got to plan for the future, and you can't go season by season as they do a little bit more in maybe American sports.
Well, as you say, it's no surprise. And you know what, as well, it's worth just stating, not to labour the point, but in spite of the general improvement in Ireland that we have seen, this Six Nations has once again underlined Sexton's importance, even against Italy. The difference when he came on versus the previous 60, everything just looked better, smoother, more fluid.
Sure, Joey had just softened them up in the first 55, 60 minutes. For you know, people say they were Joey detractors in some shape or form. It's clear as day, you know, what he does add. And it's funny, I've watched a lot of footage this week because we're doing a piece at the weekend with ITV on Marcus Smith versus Johnny Sexton, and both of them understand space. They really do. But Johnny's understanding is pure experience, whereas Marcus gets it, but he's got this incredible athletic prowess that gets him out of trouble that wouldn't allow other players to be able to survive. And also he backs himself so much. He's, if in doubt, he'll back himself, whereas Johnny's now really using his intellect. He's an inferior athlete to Marcus Smith, and inferior to many other 10s, but still very capable. If you offer him a gap, he'll still go through it. So it's his passing game and his vision and his ability to attract defenders and then pick the right option is the real differentiator between, you know, another player of 37 or 38 and him, and that's why he's still our number one.
Yeah. And
we'll be saying that for another 15 months, so people need to
precisely,
accept it.
And you know the way you say it's experience. I presume though there is a gifted innate ability there. Or like at 25, I presume he was still ahead of the pack in terms of appreciation of space and pictures.
Yeah, and finding that pass and picking it. But he's playing a game plan that allows him to do that really well. He's very comfortable. I think the pre-season that he got when he didn't go on the Lions tour worked so well in his favour, because he was able to embed himself with non-international players in that pre-season, so players of a lesser calibre. And so he really had to work hard, bringing them along with him. I think the 5-week period where Leinster didn't have a game in December worked a treat, where they were able to drill down their plays. And the reality is, it's a very, very close version of what Leinster are doing with Ireland. So he's comfortable. He's practiced it for the last 3 or 4 years and honed and developed and evolved it. And he's been a big part of that process. But he's totally comfortable with the shape of what they're trying to create, and then picking those relevant options depending on what the defence is showing him. I would say his peripheral vision is a massive distinction as well. I think that above Carberry, above others, whatever about his ability, his know-how, his ability to be able to scan and read the defence and see where the wingers are in particular and when they're playing in. There was once or twice where Carberry threw a pass out the back where the winger shot in, where Joey, passes the screen player running short, the back out the back, but he actually misses both of them over the top because he sees the winger shooting in. It's all to do with shoulder and hip shape, and and how aggressive they're coming. And Johnny's able to see that hundredths of a second quicker than I don't know if there's anybody else. Right. I don't think there's anyone that sees it as clearly as that, to be honest with you.
Your cohesion point brings us to Eddie Jones, which is very much the talk of the week. Ireland are literally, and I say this without hesitation, the most cohesive side in the world. Bulk of their team train together for the bulk of the year, so they're very well coordinated in their attack, very structured, very sequenced in set plays. I think that was a genuinely meant point. He did have a subtle dig, is maybe the unfair way of putting it, but he did say with a view to the World Cup, we're in a great place. The 3 months before the World Cup is where every team becomes equal. We all have the same amount of time to practice. We all have the players the same amount of time. And so what he's talking about here is Stuart Lancaster effectively at Leinster is running international camp. They're perfecting these plays day in, day out. And you struck me as a perfect person to talk to about this, because you have come from Leinster, bulk supplier to the national team, playing with Leo Cullen probably since school. You knew what he was going to do before he was going to do it, I'd say, on a pitch. And you've experienced how much of an advantage that might be. And then you've also pitched up in a Lions tour where we're starting from zero and we have to get to cohesive very, very quickly. So your thoughts on Jones's points there?
Yeah, I think I'm always mindful that there's an undertone in everything that he says, but I do feel as though I agree with a lot of what he is saying. I think if you look at certain teams around World Cup time that ordinarily wouldn't have had a huge amount of time together, and Argentina are a prime example. World Cups in 99, 07 in particular. In 03 we scraped by them. They were still a good team, could have beaten us. So but they would always have struggled from a cohesion point of view, because they wouldn't have spent that much time in training camp. You put them together for 2 or 3 months and you drill them like a proper pre-season. It's actually the longest pre-season any team's ever going to get. And all of a sudden, he's right. You get an opportunity to do exactly what you are trying to do. And I think if you look over the course of the Six Nations from an English point of view, I thought they were very disjointed against Scotland. I thought shape was very poor, very unsure as to what they were trying to achieve. And progressively, I think that's gotten much better. Right. Some good signs of it in the first half against Wales. They didn't have an awful lot of possession. In the second half, they kicked a lot of it away. But I thought some of it was really good, and they had their lines of running. They're doing a very similar model to what Ireland are doing. Right. You're still seeing that pod up front, with one inside, one outside, player out the back. And then there's always a modification on what happens outside that. Different teams are doing different things. But if you'll see at the weekend, and what's really interesting, and we might go on to it, is seeing some of the two of the best ball players are the tight head props in both teams. Both of them have run that pod the best.
Okay.
And to watch the silky skills of both Sinclair and Furlong carry the same way, read the defence well, very, very smart footballers. So you'll see them in at that first distributor. And when it does go out the back, like I said, there are variations. And I do think that Johnny squares around the corner better than Marcus Smith. Smith buys time and does square up, but he not to the same degree. And I just think that that's an experience thing. I think he's a young guy still, and when he learns what space he can create out wide from those small little nuances, I think he'll be a fabulous player.
And you were on so many Lions tours, say, by comparison with Leinster and Ireland and cohesiveness. Did you generally get to a point on Lions tours where come the first or second test you looked around and you said, I feel like we know each other as well and we know what we're doing as well as an international side I've played with? Yeah,
I think the difference with Lions tours is that everyone gets it within 3-4 sessions.
Because the calibre?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just the standard.
Okay.
The standard of training is different level.
Okay.
Completely different level. Where you don't have many guys that aren't very good at almost everything. And those that aren't stand out like sore thumbs, and the cream does rise to the top in those sessions, where you also have to play probably a relatively simplistic game plan, and the evolution of that, certainly under Gats, was working hard around the corner, and then they obviously changed it up a little bit in 17, and wasn't much fun watching this time round. But
for
before that, the ones that I was involved in, it was
big conversation.
Yeah. It was like having a clear idea in week one. This is the way we got to play. We're going to outwork the opposition, and we're going to be grafters, and then we're going to leave ourselves an opportunity for a bit of X factor to showcase what they're capable of doing.
Okay, makes sense, I suppose. And were there certain players that you clicked with straight away?
Yeah, there are. I think you probably get that more on game day, and you really understand what someone's made of. But yeah, there are players where I thought I clicked pretty well with Manu Tuilagi, and I thought he was my chance of playing in the Test series in 13, just because of the balance to his game. And sometimes you need, when I was a younger guy, I was the listener. And then sometimes you need that dynamic, a bit of experience and a bit of youthful exuberance. And then in later tours, Manu and maybe I was the experienced guy, and same with Jamie Roberts. That was my third tour, his first in 09. So he kind of came in and listened a lot to what we were trying to do. And I think you're passing on IP as well. You're passing on knowledge as to why things work and breaking things down rather than just running through plays for the sake of it. It's also, the game is a very different place than it is now. I think players have a very distinct understanding of what their role is. I think back then sometimes they were told to do something, and even at Lion standard, but you didn't break down why you were trying to do it. And until you understand exactly your role, how can you be certain that you're actually achieving what you're trying to achieve to stop the opposition?
The senior partner in on-field relationship's an interesting point, because I guess you wouldn't want two alphas who are competing with each other the whole time. And no, I said we're going to do it that way. No, well, we're doing it my way.
Well, it would have been really interesting what would have happened in 01. Now, I was still young, but I don't know if I would have been able to play my game the way I wanted to if Will Greenwood was playing at 12. He was more of a 13. I think he would have been trying to do a hybrid 12-13 between the two of us. And from his perspective, he got injured a week or two before the first test, 10 days before the first test, and Hendo got in, and we formed a good partnership because we'd obviously played in Ireland together. But that was interesting. And then similarly with Jonathan Davis in 2013, we're two 13s playing in the centre, pure 13s. Neither of us were 12s, and we tried to make it fit, and we just didn't quite gel. And you get that. That's the reality of it. But in the other ones, you look back, Jamie is the obvious one. Hendo, we worked really well in 01, Rob Henderson. And then, 05, sure. I thought we were a solid partnership for the 45 seconds I was on the park for the first test with Johnny Wilkinson. So I don't know. I can't. Yeah, that's blurred out.
Yeah, would have been interesting to see how that partnership would have.
Yeah, to be honest with you, we were always going to be up against that, weren't we?
No, sure, but like just your own little corner, how you might have done.
But we had obviously, playing Johnny as a left footer in the centre, Steve Jones, right footer. There was a huge focus on the back of what England had done in 03 with, Mike Catt coming on as a right footer in the centre and finishing games out and being that kicking option, Bolshaw at fullback, right footer, to complement Johnny's left. So it was a real kicking focus. So maybe not, what I was loving listening to, but, you shut up and put up.
Yeah, no doubt. So Twickenham then. Let's talk Twickenham. 04, 06, 10 is a nice sweet spot in your career, given that Ireland previously had won there in 94 and I think 82. And then suddenly, wow.
Ginger McLaughlin, was that 82?
Yeah. I know to double check, but it must have been because there weren't many others. Yeah. I looked. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
Okay.
So each ground has its own, I suppose, tradition and quirk and flavour. What's the Twickenham experience?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's so enormous. It's vast and not particularly intimate. There's an intimacy to Cardiff. I know you're talking probably 20,000 odd less. That's why. But I think Twickenham, we had a couple of nightmares early on in 2000, 2002 where we got beaten by 40 or 50 points. So we knew what Swing Low, Sweet Chariot was about, with them head of steam and just unstoppable. So you have to play with a bit of fear in Twickenham for sure. You have to play and 04 was a real catalyst for that Irish team. It was their first game back after winning the World Cup. Obviously lots of changes, but for us to beat them against the odds there was huge for us, and I think that instilled a big amount of confidence. And then the fact that it wasn't a fluke in 2 years later when we're back there again, I think we're kind of reinforced that we were a half decent team. Not many sides go to Twickenham and win. I just remember it being somewhere where you had to, a bit like the French in Stade de France in the early 2000s. Hang in there, strap yourself in and survive the first 15-20 minutes, because we chased shadows before and it could be a long, long day at the office.
And is it loud with the atmosphere?
It is loud, but certainly not one of the louder ones. Okay. It doesn't. It wasn't that. It was the ferocity of the team, and you have to remember, going back to those earlier pre-World Cup win, they were an outstanding team. They should have won multiple Grand Slams and fell at the final hurdle. So this is a very, very impressive English team we're looking at. Less so the years that we then subsequently went on to beat them, and then they're no matter what. Even when it's a poor England team or a disappointing or a subpar England team, there's still a tough beat there, you know? They really are.
Well, in 10 years, 2 Six Nations defeats there at home.
Wow.
Ireland Grand Slam in 2018. Scots last year, that's it.
And that was as comprehensive a win. However well we did to beat England in 04, 06 and 10, I'm thinking they were all one-score games, maybe 5-6 points in one of them, but would have been the biggest margin. So, but we won really well, very comprehensively in 2018, and that was a surprise. It just never felt that, irrespective of any English team that come up, to try and play against a team looking for a Grand Slam at home, they're not going to lie down. And I was really surprised that day that we got the better of them as convincingly as we did. But then, since then, shows the cycle of the game. We've been thumped by England a few times, and they've really physically imposed themselves and kind of made apparent our Achilles heel of this not being able to deal with the high levels of physicality that the best teams in the world are able to do.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. So, I guess that 1920 period was where and it paralleled with Saracens. It felt like, geez, Irish teams against these English teams physically can't compete.
But there was two teams.
I know, yeah.
There was no other side. If you look at at all other sides in England, you know, none of the provincial teams would have struggled consecutively like Leinster did with Sarries. And it's just two big games, and Sarries are a great team.
No, 100%. So I wanted to ask, where are we now? Because there is no doubt England almost being talked about as underdogs for this game at home. And by the way, if they lose this and then go to Paris, they could be looking at 5th place again. They're going to try and make this physically, I would think, a real war for starters. So physically, do they have an edge on Ireland still?
Do you know what? Much less so. The thing is, and I'd be mindful of the terminology I use here, but I think if you look at the great England team of the World Cup's semi-final and subsequent final loss, particularly, and the team that built up, you have to remember as well, at 16-17 they won Slam and Championship, and then obviously a disappointing year in 18, but for 19 they were able to bounce back within that year and come back and deliver a team that got to a World Cup final. But if you look at the personnel there, it just felt a team more capable of physically dominating teams consistently. I just don't know if there's not that strength and depth. Everyone's a little bit older now. You look at George Cruz versus Ewells in the second row. Ewells, I know, is a bit of enforcer for Bath, but just don't think he has the same nastiness, same know-how. You know, guys like Will Stewart coming in at tight head, again, bench. Guys that very, very good club players, but I just don't think they're top internationals. Where before, England of 2-3 years ago, there was 11, 12 really, really top internationals within their team. Okay. And then, the supplementaries were workhorses and kind of added value to their team. So I just don't think it has the same look of an English team as one that used to scare us a few years ago. But that's not to say that they don't have the ability still to come out. And I'm not saying they're going to blow us away, but I think we've got to be very mindful of what is coming, and it's going to be that attempt to physically dominate us and push us around. And, on paper, do we look a little bit light in the second row in Tyburn and James Ryan? Probably. Comparatively to Ewells and Itoje, will they be trying to outmuscle them and be nasty? Yeah, they will. So it's a big moment for this team to see how they deal with that level of aggression that's coming at them. And
would you be tempted to bring Ian Henderson back in, who played 80 minutes on Friday?
I would be. I think he does add something to us. I don't know at whose expense. It's very difficult to drop Tyburn at the moment. But I don't know who's number one anymore. Lineouts obviously is a very important factor as well, and who's calling it and who's marshalling things.
And where are you in this?
Particularly if Peter O'Mahony's not going to be playing.
Where are you in this move, Byrne to 6?
Yeah. I think that's there's definitely something in it. We don't want to just think about the defensive side of things. You do need a ball carrying 6. So is it Doris goes to 8? You miss that bit of size with Conan. How good was he against England in the Aviva last year? That performance got him selected for the Lions. So I'd be conscious of maybe not changing that too much. So I think they will stick with the same back row of Conan, Doris and Van der Fleer, but which of the second rows drops to the bench if you bring Henderson in? I don't know. Possibly James Ryan.
And does Conway go back into the right wing, or does Hansen start if we're assuming Lowe starts?
I think Conway probably does go back in, because he was the guy in possession, and unless they've seen something at training where Hansen's just ripping him up and one-on-one, he's shown that that he has the better of him. Mm-hmm. But Conway has been there for lots of big ones recently, hasn't let us down, scores tries, finishes very well, makes very few errors, good in the air, all the things you want in in an international winger. I think he's super solid, but then has sparks of X factor too. So I think they're all close calls. I do. I think we're not even talking about Keith Earls anymore. So. And guys like Stockdale sitting on the injured list, it's a great place that they're in. That there's so many selection headaches. But I do think that if you are picking from a full deck, I think Conway does go back in there, and I think Lowe probably plays on the other wing for now.
I've seen the suggestion made, if England are now going with, say, 2 ball-playing centres, that perfect opportunity to put Bundyaki in there and, say, bash on through them and bash away for the full 80 and leave Henshaw out, which seems...
Yeah, unfortunately for Robbie, the game wasn't his greatest game against Italy. You try to think of opportunities created, not a huge amount,
Weird game.
It was a weird game. It was a weird game. And you know what? When you watch it back, they were so close to killing them 3 or 4 more times. Okay. And I do think that if you have Johnny in there, that you pick the pass more often, and you're around the corner with 3 numbers on one winger chasing across, not even a full back anymore. It was that glaringly obvious. So yeah, it's unfortunate because the problem is he was given the opportunity. He's still number 1. I do think that Henshaw is still number 1 in Farrell's eyes. I think he feels as though he will pick the pass and pick the option more often than Bundy. Bundy will give you security, he will give you advantage line, and he will, still very proficient passing wise and everything. But I think those clutch moments of getting someone to make a decision with hundredths of a second, I think there's a greater backing for Robbie still, that he's the one that's going to be able to pick the correct option more often than Bundy.
Okay. Ireland at the breakdown I want to ask you about. So against Wales, the competition there was non-existent in that aspect of the game. France really went after Ireland there. Italy had some joy against Ireland there.
Yeah, they did.
And no doubt Eddie Jones noticed all this. So you suspect there's going to be war at the breakdown. Has there been any slight slippage on Ireland's part, or do you suspect this week there'll be just let's re-establish our first principles, we need to pay attention to this again?
I think they will always have that conversation. I don't think that's necessarily just on the basis of what happened recently. I think when they have a great ruck speed like they did in the Welsh game, I think they won't be licking themselves either, thinking they're the finished article. I think it's something, a continuum that they have to stay on top of, that it is the winning and losing of your attack game. And it starts with ball carrier. And it was funny, they're very different ruck performances against France. They got counter-rucked by a team that physically just dominated them. And so I wonder, did they talk about it in advance and think about putting an extra person in there, putting an extra body in there and being more mindful? But against Italy, actually they were caught a few times on line breaks, on the support play not quite being there. And I think there's a big responsibility on the ball carrier there to buy time for the opposition. Referees are quite hot on that second movement on the ground, but I do think you can bounce back from the initial fall and get long body and get yourself north-south and give your clearers a target to be able to clear over, and just make it a little bit more challenging for the would-be jacklers coming in trying to steal ball. They had a little bit of look, and maybe it's no harm that actually happened, because even when they were down to 13, they still were pilfering balls. So that should be some alarm bells going, we're not there yet. We aren't, we did it in the first game. We haven't done it properly in games 2 and 3. So that has to be a real focus of attention against England. And they will have, Don Brandt got a turnover or 2. Curry's obviously very good on it. Itoji's very good on the ball as well. So Cowan Dickey's not going to be playing. He'd be good on it. Genge isn't afraid of sticking his head where the sun doesn't shine either. So it's there's plenty of guys capable of doing it. So they really will need to focus on their ruck accuracy to create that ruck, fast ruck ball that we know when we do, we will cut any team apart with the shape that we have.
And are you fearful? You said England's attacking setup looked a bit better against Wales, even though they didn't have much possession. Because I think, at a glance, you could say, well, England against Wales, 1 try scored to Wales's 3. England only had 2 line breaks. They're really just a kicking team in defence. Do Ireland need to be that fearful? Would be, maybe the word.
I'm just saying it was better than it was against Scotland. I'm not saying it was
World
cutting
class
edge yet.
Okay.
I think you could see green shoots as to what they were trying to achieve. I thought their lines of running and their timing was shocking against Scotland, even for a team that hadn't been together an awful lot. Just they were lacking massive penetration. They, were running at kind of half speed, and they were running in front of the ball carrier. All the things that maybe we were doing, a year ago, and all of a sudden now, you get your timing right a little bit, you sit down defenders. The one thing that I did notice a few times is Marcus Smith having a go himself. So what he is spotting is on that first pod, so is it depending on who runs the short line outside of the ball carrier. So it's that hitting the middle guy, option in, option out. If they go out the back and the guy running the short line sits down the defender, Smith will see the separation of that defender's shoulders turning in, and then depending on who the personnel is as the next defender, he'll have a go at that space. And he did it a couple of times against Wales. And that's the peripheral vision piece of being able to see what's happening just as you're getting the ball, to see the shoulder line of the defender that you're trying to attack on the outside of, and then see the body shape of the defender pressing up that thinks it's your man. It ended up being Wyn Jones and Adam Beard a couple of times. That's perfect for him.
Yes.
As soon as a prop turns his shoulders in and a second row is playing hard up, he's not going to have the agility. They need a 2-man tackle on someone like Smith. So he will have to be very vigilant where we are defending with 2 front rowers together, that he will not need a second invitation to have a bite through that through the kind of seam.
And Smith's abilities notwithstanding, it sounds like Ireland could be reasonably confident of not conceding too many tries here.
I think defensively we have been very strong, and we've even the try conceded against Wales obviously was against the run of play a bit. It was one that you could chalk off. The couple against France, I think we were shocked by the first one. You might say that it travelled marginally forward. They got away with it. So we haven't been cut open. We haven't had to scramble that many times, which would lead you to believe that defensively the system's in place. They're getting their spacings. I think they've been able to match physically the opposition. For the most part, obviously we're on the back foot a bit against France in that first half in particular. But yeah, I think that's been something that's really, really improved. You think back to the defensive performance against New Zealand, I thought that was absolutely outstanding. And yeah, whatever about the attack game, you've always got to keep an eye on what you're doing defensively, of making sure you're squeezing pressure on playmakers that like time on the ball. All of them do.
Yeah.
And Marcus Smith is someone that looks as though he's more time than he does, but I think he can be squeezed more for pressure. I think Wales didn't really get after him very often.
I wanted to ask you about options off the bench, and particularly when it comes to scrum-half. I think we've had a tradition generally during the Murray era of somebody to quicken things up off the bench, give or take. And now we've got Gibson-Park, who's very much starting, and he's all about tempo and pace. And our option off the bench is Murray, who is experienced and very steady, but doesn't feel like an injection of tempo. Now, I don't know, maybe if you're leading by 20 points, that's all right. But as a chase the game option, should we be thinking about some more tempo off the bench, or do you like the Murray option?
It's such a hard one, I think there's such comfort, and we've said it for years on here about the comfort that Murray does give to his team. There's a real sense of security there. But then Craig Casey's absolutely putting pressure on him because of the exciting tempo that he brings. Also, we're trying to play a high tempo game. That's what you're trying to do. And you can see a difference between Gibson-Park and Murray when he has come on. It does slow down. There is a little bit more box kicking. We are waiting for shape to set up. Whereas the speed of delivery from Casey and Gibson-Park has been a point of difference for both of them. And so I do think there's more pressure coming on Conor Murray to really understand his USP. Because I think Casey and Gibson-Park, it's very evident. Besides control, is control enough now?
If you're winning, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you're chasing the game, I'd say if you've been on the pitch and you saw pace
here's the
coming
question.
off.
When was the
tempo.
last time Conor Murray took a quick tap?
Not this Six Nations, I don't think.
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
A few dummied quick taps. But with regard to getting after opposition, like he's coming on with 20 minutes to go, bodies are tired.
Yeah.
Make silly decisions. Players give them, pick up a yellow card for taking someone, 3 metres from the tap. I literally hadn't seen it. Think about the Welsh nines. Think about Ben Youngs, Randall. These guys take quick taps. They try and bring energy to the game. And I think it's something that used to be part of Conor's game. That's the thing. I haven't genuinely, it doesn't stick out in my head. I haven't seen one for a few years.
You wonder if it's been said to him, we need more of that from you. We're playing a high-tempo game. We need you to get there as well. Yeah,
and sometimes, maybe you look back on what has worked for you in the past. Even when he had his great season in 17, 18, I still don't remember that.
Fair enough.
What about the line break, in 16, those sort of moments, those snipes against the All Blacks in Soldier Field,
yeah.
We just don't see that many of them anymore. And I think that only comes from increasing the tempo and taking chances. And I think it's coming to a point that he's probably going to need to do it because Casey is offering so much else.
Because if there's 10 minutes left and you're 5 points down and you're bringing tempo off the bench, you have to be bringing tempo off the bench.
And maybe he at the moment, Ireland have been quite controlled when he's come off. Have we been behind and really struggling in games that we've had to revolutionise what we've been trying to do? I can't think of it. Against France, we were a score behind. It's not like you need to chase a couple of scores. When was the last time we had that? Not for a while.
But against France, did you not think?
Yeah, we could have done with more energy.
Dropping.
Yeah, we could have.
To speed it up.
Particularly them. They're a massive team. Move them around.
Yeah.
Make them make some bad decisions. Make them feel uncomfortable.
So, Murray's a brilliant player. That goes without needing to be said here. So, but I presume it's within his repertoire to say, just speed it up here.
Of course it is.
So you wonder why is that not?
I don't
happening?
know.
Okay.
I don't know. Do you know what? Maybe he'll listen to the pod and we'll see it on Saturday.
Okay. You've got to run, I know. So give us a last overview on this because it sounds like if Ireland with Sexton back are going to attack quite well and have lots of options, if they're going to pay attention to the breakdown, and if in defence they can kind of largely handle what England are throwing at them, Marcus Smith very much included, and they have to be wary of him. This sounds like we're going ominously towards Ireland to go to Twickenham and win, and as confident as we've been about that in some time.
I think based on what we've seen in the last 5-6 months, there's a reason why Eddie Jones and why lots of English people and pundits that I work with as well think that Ireland are in better shape and are probably marginal favourites. I'd have to agree with them. It's rare enough that you go to Twickenham and you might be interesting to see what the bookies have, but a point or two favourites. It's going to be a very tight game, of course, but I do think, based on what we have seen so far, that Ireland have offered more in attack, been defensively very solid. England haven't scored many tries, kicked their goals, put pressure on teams to eke out penalties, which you shouldn't knock. You can't take away from that. They squeeze. Wales continued to give away penalties, and they just kept that scoreboard ticking over. But then they kind of tightened up and stopped playing. So I do think that Ireland shouldn't have, of course, you play with a bit of fear, but they shouldn't be concerned that, if they deliver what they have shown against the All Blacks, against Wales, in parts against France, I think they'll cause England big problems, and so they should be able to create opportunities to score tries. And so, from that point of view, I do feel as though there should be an air of confidence going over there.
Okay, very good. Well, our rugby coverage is with thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team of us, everyone in. Brian O'Driscoll, thanks very much.
Cheers, Joe.